Good afternoon, everyone. I call this meeting to order, the meeting of the Santa Rosa City Council of August 15th, 2017. We'll begin with a call to roll.
Let the record show that all council members are present with the exception of Councilmember Combs.
Thank you, Ms. Gomez. Report on closed session, Ms. Gallagher.
Yes, the council received an update with their labor negotiators. No action was taken. On item 2.2, council gave direction to staff regarding existing litigation in the matter of CVSR Holdings.
Thank you. We have no study sessions, no proclamations, no staff briefings. City Manager, do you have a report?
I have nothing to report.
And Ms. Gallagher, any report from the City Attorney?
Yes, we have provided you with a quarterly report of settlements and of active litigation. And this obviously is a report that you receive quarterly. I wanted to just point out that we have changed the format slightly so that in the past, the list of pending matters was simply by date. We have instead grouped them by the nature of the action so that you can have a better sense of what kinds of cases we are getting. So the categories are police action cases, personal injury and dangerous conditions, land use matters, and code enforcement matters, and then other miscellaneous matters. And the report speaks for itself.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Council, the report is in our packets. Are there any questions on that? All right, thank you. Any statements of abstention tonight?
Mayor, I was absent on the 18th of July, so I will be abstaining from the approval of those minutes.
Thank you.
I will also be abstaining from item 11.1.
Thank you. All right, on to council members and mayor's reports. Who wants to start? Anyone? Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, just two quick things. I had an opportunity last week to represent Santa Rosa at Santa Rosa Day at the fair. If you didn't have an opportunity to check out this year's Sonoma County Fair, it was much more condensed than usual, but it looked like the attendance was higher. We had an opportunity to thank some of our board members and commissioners by inviting them to be in the winner's circle for that specific day, for that specific race. And so that was great. Just wanted to say thank you to everybody who worked so hard to put on the fair this year. I also had a chance this weekend to go out and be a part of the citizens rally to stand with those who were murdered and those who were injured in Charlottesville this weekend. Obviously, that is something that has been brewing for a while, and our community continues to stand together against that sort of hatred and bigotry. It was really nice on less than a day's notice to see more than 300 people go out and peacefully march throughout our community. So just wanted to thank the organizers for that, for everything that they did to organize it, and for those who showed up. And hopefully we're not doing much more of that this year, but good to see that our community is willing to if we have to.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Schwed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple items. Last week we had the San Jose Violence Prevention Partnership Policy and Operational Team meeting. At that meeting, we adopted the 2017 through 2021 strategic plan, which will be coming to this body at a future council agenda. Additionally, last Wednesday, the Groundwater Sustainability Act Board had its meeting on the 10th, and we did appoint the advisory committee, which will be partnering with each of the entities having a representative. And I'd like to just announce who those appointments were. So for the rural residential appointees, Marlene Soyland and Doug Beretta were appointed. Agriculture was Bob Anderson and David Long. Environmental was Ruth Furch and Sebastian Birch. And business was Joe Gaffney. And then along with a couple other council members, I attended the Sonoma County Mayors and Council Members meeting at Sonoma State University last week. And last Friday had a wonderful event at the Family Support Center, a back-to-school event. I want to thank both the police and fire department. They had many of their employees and some apparatus. That was really a nice community event for both the folks who were staying, the clients at the Family Support Center, and also some other community members who appeared for that.
Mr. Tibbetts, Mr. Oliveris, Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. We had a meeting of the Long-Term Financial Policy and Audit Subcommittee last week. Probably one of the more important items was had to do with internal audits with the city. It's actually a very detailed endeavor. We mainly talked about the policy in general, and then also the procurement card audit report, which will be coming back from the council. Council member Rogers and I both approved the drafts, and they will come back to the council for a more detailed discussion in the very near future. We also had a discussion about revenues on ballots and which ones are voted on and what are the options when it comes to revenue to the city. We had a conversation around the BIA, the county business improvement area, and I would say that, which is going to be an ongoing conversation, and I would say those are probably the highlights of the meeting last week.
Thank you. So I can't let this opportunity pass without saying a couple of words about the weekend's events in Charlottesville, Virginia. Thank you, Mr. Rogers, for mentioning the show of support that our community did on Sunday. That was impressive. I want to offer my condolences to the victims of these horrific events, including the young woman and the 2 police officers who died in Charlottesville, and the many others who were injured by what can only be called a terrorist act. Charlottesville is a city it's less than a third the size of Santa Rosa. And when you see something like this happening in a place that's really a small town, you understand that these kind of things can happen anywhere. It's hard to imagine anything like that happening in Santa Rosa. I don't think that we're that kind of community. But to make sure it doesn't, we all must remain indivisible. We must resolve to support love and not hate. We must stand up and speak out when evil goes on the march. Violence and racist hatred are not just some of the many sides of the political debate that's going on in America. They're crimes. It's this city's stated policy to protect all of our residents under our indivisible resolution. I think we all understand the difference between a political debate and a crime. And I think I'm safe in saying that it's the council's policy and the city's policy that crime will not be tolerated in Santa Rosa. We'll move on to number 10.2.
Request for agenda item regarding making a contribution to the Sonoma County Secure Families Fund.
So this is my item, and I want to thank you, Mr. Mayor, for seconding it during the last council meeting. For those of you on the council who aren't aware, the County of Sonoma and a group of local advocates and organizers have created what's known as the Sonoma County Secure Families Fund. And at its most fundamental core, it is the purpose of this fund to provide for the legal defense and the awareness of rights amongst undocumented residents within Santa Rosa. The objective of the fund is to raise $2 million over the course of the next 3 years, and it's unknown whether this money will even be called upon. But the county is asking for people, for governments, for businesses, and individual donors within the community to make 3-year commitments to this fund to help protect our share of residents in Sonoma County. You know, one of the things that, and Santa Rosa is not just the only jurisdiction that's going to be called upon to make this contribution. Every incorporated city within the county will be also. At this point, we are the first, though, to hear it before our body. I bring it to you for your consideration. The figure that the county has asked of us, the County of Sonoma is going to be making a $100,000 a year commitment for the next 3 years. And they're going to be asking the cities to be making a proportional contribution relative to their population. If that's the case, if that's the way that we're going to move forward, if we decide to do so, our contribution would also be about $100,000 for the next 3 years. However, I fully recognize that there's a lot of calls on our budget at this time, but I think a commitment of any kind would be substantial both for the potential recipients as well as for a show of solidarity with the folks that we seek to protect with our indivisible city resolution. And going back to the resolution, I just want to call your attention to Section 4, which states that the Santa Rosa City Council calls upon the County of Sonoma and all incorporated cities within the County of Sonoma to adopt the foregoing policies, and we welcome opportunities to partner with the legislature, other jurisdictions, local organizations, and businesses that support and defend these populations. So by making this contribution, we will be fulfilling one of the sections in our indivisible city resolution. And I'm happy to answer any questions I can to the best of my ability.
I think what's before us tonight is just a straight-up vote on whether to add this to a future council agenda. And you have your statement, a second, and let's vote on whether to put this on an agenda in the future. Sorry, actually, I do have a couple of cards. And there, if you have questions, we'll do council questions first.
I am curious, you know, when was this decision made by the county? When did the county hear this request? Do you know when it started? When this all started?
Sorry, I think it started about 6 months ago. They actually started working with the Sonoma County Community Foundation. I believe they're the ones who are intended to be the recipients of this money because they're going to be taking in private contributions as well. It's supposed to be a public-private effort. The person I'd refer you to speak with for the exact details is either Bruce Goldstein with the county, Lisa Carreño, or Karen Demarest at the Community Foundation.
So if the council, if the council schedules this for a future conversation, we could invite Mr. Goldstein to the council to make a presentation on the effort.
Thank you.
Mr. Oliveris, did you have a question? Okay. Mr. Schwedo.
Thank you. This is another one of those difficult ones where I support the cause, and I actually looked at the County of Sonoma's, their supervisor's report, and they've been talking about this since the beginning of the year. And so for me personally, it's kind of frustrating that now we're just being asked to participate in supporting this part of our community, especially since we've gone through budget discussions, we've gone through priorities, and this specific topic has not made those priorities. So if we do come back, and I would like to have more information, so I think I will be supportive in bringing it back. But from the city manager perspective, and I'm not sure where staff would do additional feedback, because I want to know if this is going to be a priority for us. What aren't we going to do that's currently under 5 tiers? Also, during the budget process, there's a couple other large community projects that we elected not to provide any funding for, namely the library, free bus passes for students and veterans. How does this factor in, compete against that? And I would also be interested that as these things come up during the year, rather than doing them one-off, because I think this is kind of a one-off, if council as a whole decided, let's do a funding for any things that come up with a specific, this amount of money that's identified, undesignated money, that we could then for lack of a better word, allocate some of that funding that's already been set aside, so there's not a consequence that the city manager, as he's trying to work on the budget, we're taking funds to do this, okay, now we're gonna have to stop doing this and do this, because, you know, it's only August, there's probably many other asks of the governments maybe coming up. So it's just like what some of our other conversations were with another item where we're looking for some funding. It's difficult because to me this is almost out of context, but I know this is, you know, I'm supportive of supporting members of the community that this is trying to help, but how we're going to be doing it on a case-by-case basis. So, you know, I will be supportive of it coming back, and so I'm just sharing some of this information. That's what I would like to hear from staff, and even the presentation at the mayor's and council members' reports. I heard a lot of words without a lot of data to back up the supporting documentation about school attendance. You know, he specifically mentioned school attendance was down. I'm hearing otherwise in the city of Santa Rosa, and I did not see a correlation to the information here equals lower school attendance. So I just wanted a little bit more information, because I also know there are some nonprofits that currently are existing in our community that are providing services similar to this. And what I would hate to do is recreate the wheel if government could do some things that could complement other nonprofit efforts versus let's do our own. It's a little, there's some hesitancy there. So it's not the initiative, it's the way we're going about it that I'm a little bit cautious about. Thank you.
Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, my question was pretty much along the similar line, which is I'm supportive of bringing this back and having a conversation, but I'm looking at our upcoming meeting list. There's a lot of really important things and big things that are on here. So I was just curious about what the timeline might look like. And is it possible for us to move this forward, not necessarily in that tier 1 category that we've talked about before, but I'm saying, you know, maybe end of September or early October being when it starts to lighten up on the really big things that we have to do. So I was hoping you could shed some light on that, Mr. Mayor.
We'll get to it. We'll get to that. I can't shed any light on that right now. Did you want to respond, Mr.?
Yes, so I just want to say to Councilmember Schwedhelm, I agree with you. I'm also really concerned about how would a request of any size impact other areas of our budget. Is this something that could come from the contingency fund that exists, or is this something that needs to come from a larger pot? Also, I know that we're going to have our mid-year coming up pretty soon. What do the revenues look like? Is there any available funding? To me, that would be an appropriate time to take a look at what do we have to spare. As far, you know, I don't, Councilmember Rogers, to answer your question, I can't, it does look like a pretty hefty list next week. I think in good faith, though, what we ought to do is if the city manager could reach out to Mr. Goldstein at the county and ask what his timeline is and what would be important for him. I think it would be a show in good faith that we're willing and eager to partner in this effort.
I will defer to the mayor on that issue. I think the council's well aware that there are some things that are pending out there that are potentially going to be hugely impactful on the schedule. So I can't comment at this time about scheduling. And again, I'm waiting for some direction about whether this wants to be heard at a future meeting so you can start to get into the brass tacks of the conversation. Again, we will reach out, we will try to make connection, but I also want to be very, very cognizant of what the council is going to be wrestling with potentially wrestling with in the next couple of weeks, and then the impacts of that conversation as we move forward. All I can say is right now, I don't know. I think that the mayor will I'll have to sit with the mayor and figure out when availability is on the schedule. But I think right now the question is the council interested in having this conversation, and then we'll try to get back to the scheduling point. I can't commit at this moment to a schedule.
Okay. The other thing I'll add, Councilmember Schwedhelm, is that they are using these funds to engage local nonprofits to be engaged in their area of expertise, so they would be engaged.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to make a quick comment. It's not always as simple as writing a check for some of the things that we do. This is obviously an important issue, and it goes back to the resolution that we did enact. So I would be interested too in learning, may not be so much as how we fund this, but how do we promote it, how do we engage? We can all do things as individuals, we can encourage the community to be involved as individuals. So if it comes back, it's looking more at a broader perspective of how we support some type of effort like this. And as Councilmember Schwedhelm said, there are other nonprofits, other organizations doing something similar. So it's good to know what is happening and where do we fit in a community effort to be responsive. It's not, again, it's not just a matter of being asked for by us to be writing a check, but what other things can we do to support the overall effort?
Okay, I have a couple cards for public comment. Peter Cherneff.
Good afternoon. So, secure families, and it sounds like it's the beginning of a good discussion. And I just want to bring about 3 brief points that may have connections. One of them is that I have provided an email to all of you, which includes the flyer that 3 of you have received. Since Julie Combs isn't there, I would hope that Chief Tom would take the one next to him on his right. It's about a serious action for an active push to gather more information on a missing child in conjunction with investigator Monique Lassan and her international radio show. All the information is there. I hope you give it a serious consideration. And the second one is, how secure are we going to feel when the children that are getting all these forced vaccines end up with symptoms of a terminal nature in 7 to 11 years, knowing that Dr. Maurice Wolin created the vaccines. He also created the vaccines for the military starting in '92, and 9 million of these vets are now dead, and 6 million are terminal. And also knowing that nationwide, doctors kill 2,000 times more than all the gun violence in this country combined. And the last quick point is that I really enjoyed hearing Mayor Corsi speak about supporting love and not hate, so I hope he'll follow the lead of another mayor, Clint Eastwood, who also agrees with that, and that's why he's a vegan, just like Jesus, Gandhi, Cesar Chavez, and the entire Peanuts gang. So I hope that you take these into serious consideration, especially the flyer, and of course, the veganism. Thank you very much.
Chris Grable.
Good afternoon. I hope I can shed some light on both the program, the initiative, the county's initiative, and sort of what we see as the responsibility of the participants, anybody who contributes to, for instance, the Secure Families Fund. I'm a part of a group called the Padilla Partners, which is a group of immigration attorneys, advocates, in partnership with the County Council and Public Defender's Office. We help develop this program. Some of our members also, Alegría de la Cruz, instrumental in developing the program, raising awareness, bringing all agencies on board, because we see the need. Drop it in, for instance, there is really good data on a drop in population seeking neonatal care, emergency services across the board in Latino community, mental health services, suicide prevention data, stuff like that. We know the need is there, and we know it's immediate. For us, it is a little bit of a contingency because you can't always predict these things, right? In the spirit of the resolution, when you are showing that you value a community, you value an individual, whether it's in business, in family, in government, community, you invest in that person, in that community. And I think just a small gesture of material support, as well as your words of support and your policies, really complete, that gesture. I think at least starting with a conversation around maybe $50,000 for the first year, which is a little more manageable than 100, given that you've already gone through these budget conversations. But to address your point, Vice Mayor Tibbetts, there already is a need for it. I know specifically that the phones ring off the hook at, for instance, Rick Koshner's office, Maureen McSorley's office. These are potential recipients, actually, of the fund money through the Community Foundation. So it actually goes directly into what is a huge lack of staff and resources in our existing, nonprofits and services available for legal defense. And it really is essential to these families who are facing what is kind of an endgame circumstance in a lot of times, and it may not involve criminal charges of any kind, and you're looking at sort of a permanent punishment that is really disproportionately affects undocumented communities and stokes a lot of fear. So I think we have that opportunity to just help a little bit with the finances, with kicking off the fund as a show of good faith, knowing that it will inspire other actors in the private sector, in nonprofits. Specifically, the Shandy family, local business owners, have already promised. Puma Vineyards, the county, different foundations have already promised. I think simply a conversation and a fair match would be really helpful.
Thank you. All right, council, your votes to put this on a future agenda. And that passes with 5 ayes and 1 no, the no being Mr. Sawyer, and Ms. Combs is absent. I will consult with the city manager on the timing of this, and I'll be in touch with the proponents from the county as well. All right, we have the minutes of July 18th. Any additions or corrections? Do we need a up or down vote on this? We've got 2 abstainers. Okay. Can I have a motion on the minutes, please?
So moved.
Second. Your votes? And that passes with 4 ayes and 2 abstentions. Councilmembers Schwedhelm and Oliveris. Consent, Mr. McGlynn.
Item 12.1, resolution, contract award, type 1 fire apparatus. Item 12.2, resolution, revocable, non-exclusive license agreement with Zipcar Incorporated. Item 12.3, resolution, approval of the Third Amendment to Professional Services Agreement F001134 with Renee Sloan Holtzman Sakai LLP, an amendment to the fiscal year 2017-18 adopted budget. Item 12.4, resolution, extension of proclamation of local homeless emergency.
Council. Any questions, Council? Mr. Schwedhelm.
Just more of a request on item 12.4, the extension of proclamation of local homeless emergency. The analysis in this proclamation is from the 2016 point in time count, and since then they've published the 2017 point in time count, which is, I think, some relevant information for us to continue with the homeless emergency. So I would just ask that if this does pass and then it comes back to us, that information be included.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have no cards on this. Mr. Tibbetts.
I move item 12.1, 12.2, and 12.3 of the consent calendar and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
Your votes on 12.1, 2, and 3. That passes with 6 ayes.
And I'll be abstaining from 12.4.
Second.
Can I have a motion on 12.4, please?
I'll move 12.4.
Second.
Thank you. Your votes?
Oh, sorry.
Reset. Votes again, please. That passes with 5 ayes, with Ms. Combs and Mr. Tibbetts absent. Moving on to, it's too early for public comment, so 14.1.
14.1, report adoption of emergency operations plan and continued continuity of operations plan. Neil Bregman, Emergency Preparedness Coordinator, presenting.
Good afternoon. I am Neil Bregman from the Santa Rosa Fire Department Emergency Preparedness Coordinator, and today with me is Chris Godley from Tetra Tech. I'll give a brief introduction. I'm going to mostly let Chris, who's worked with me on this, do most of the driving and explanation, and we'll go from there. So we're going to talk about the Emergency Operations Plan and Continuity of Operations Plan today. Those are two separate, very large, interrelated plans. Chris will get into the details, but I think it's important to note that these are sort of the highest level plans for the city. They don't get into the weeds. This is about sort of understanding, again, at that highest level, how the city will respond to different types of disasters and how we prepare and how we think about those things. All the other details that sometimes people want to know about come in documents that sort of build from this, but aren't necessarily in these plans that we'll see today. These are the highest level documents that the city has and are necessary for a number of reasons. So Chris has been working with me for almost a year on this, and I will let him introduce myself as well as take us through what's in these plans. Over to you, Chris.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Christopher Godley, I'm the Director of Emergency Management for a company called Tetra Tech. We were hired by the city to assist in developing the Emergency Operations Plan and Continuity of Operations Plan. As brief background, I should share that I served as a local government emergency manager here in the San Francisco Bay Area for about 20 years, 6 years with Sonoma County, 9 years running the program in Marin County, and most recently running the program for the city of San Jose before moving into the private sector. But probably my most important qualification is being a longtime Santa Rosa resident. So I live up on the east side there, and I certainly enjoy the city, and I want to thank the city for giving me the opportunity to serve the community in which I actually live, for a change. In terms of the Emergency Operations Plan, the Emergency Operations Plan is really designed to give the city not only just its government functions, but stakeholder agencies, community-based organizations, business community, and its residents, a plan, if you would, on how to coordinate a response to a major emergency or disaster. Not the day-to-day issues that the city has to address using its public safety systems, but for those events where those systems might be overwhelmed. Events such as a major earthquake, flood, fire, those kinds of things. The plan is generally updated and approved by the City Council on a fairly regular basis, and it's not an academic exercise for the City of Santa Rosa. Our city's previous experiences with truly major events, both in 1906 and 1969, indicate that this is something that could come to play one day. In terms of the background for developing this plan, the last emergency plan was presented and adopted by this council in 1999. So there is some need to address that here today. I appreciate the time for that. Initiating this update started in September of 2016 and really is designed to capture many of the policy and industry changes that have occurred since 1999, most notably reforms that have occurred since major events such as Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Katrina, as well as our experiences with recent catastrophic earthquakes here in California. In developing the new plan, an interdepartmental team was formed to help draft the content. Our contractor team then conducted stakeholder reviews and interviews with the stakeholders, key department consultations, and some external stakeholders also reviewed the draft plan, including the Sonoma County Office of Emergency Services and disabilities rights advocates. The purpose of the emergency plan is to really, again, provide that framework, some of the concepts, as well as policies that will guide the effective management and coordination of the city's response. It's designed to identify clearly roles and responsibilities for each of the major city departments, so everyone kind of knows what's expected of them on a departmental basis. It does codify the city's understanding and adoption of state and federal authorities, which are required for the city's full participation in state and federal response and recovery programs. And it serves as a foundational document for supporting other city plans. So, for example, internal city departmental plans on how to respond to challenges in their own functions in response to emergency are effectively subsidiary or supporting plans to this umbrella Master Emergency Operations Plan. The Emergency Operations Plan addresses what we call the 4 phases of emergency management. if you've identified what can go wrong in your community, for example, Santa Rosa is subject to earthquake risk, we want to first, in our first efforts, to attempt to mitigate that earthquake risk by ensuring that we're adhering to building codes, that we may be designing our communities to be more survivable. If we can't prevent the threat or hazard from occurring, how can we make it more resilient? Secondly, we move into preparedness, which the Emergency Operations Plan is an example of, where we conduct planning, training, and exercising that will guide the city in its response to an event. The third phase is response. That's the red lights and sirens phase, as I call it, where we're actually in response to an actual event, coordinating resources and allocating, or I should say, establishing priorities for allocating resources. And then finally, the recovery phase. This recovery phase is where we not only attempt to put the community back together again the way it was, but hopefully build in additional resilience and strengthen the community's ability to withstand events in the future. And that recovery phase can often last years in a significant event. So our EOP addresses all 4 phases. It addresses, again, city departmental responsibilities. As a matter of fact, right at the very beginning of the plan, there's now a summary chart that highlights which department has primary and secondary responsibilities for the many functions that the city will undertake in a major emergency response. We also provide a concept of operations, if you would. It's a brief narrative, a story of how the city is going to coordinate its efforts, gather its resources together, communicate with internally to its own resources, but also how to engage the community more effectively. It also touches on the role and responsibilities of the city's Emergency Operations Center. Although detailed procedures for the Emergency Operations Center are contained in a separate handbook, the EOP does ensure that it is placed in its proper context as part of the city's larger overall response. And it does highlight many of the key response functions that the city is going to perform, in addition to expanding and enhancing many of the city's day-to-day capabilities and responsibilities. The city will be tasked potentially to respond with some new service sets that it may not be already performing. And this includes safety assessment of buildings that may have been damaged by fire or earthquake, conducting overall damage assessment in terms of quantifying the impacts on the community, both in terms of physical structure and economic impacts, taking a look at the water operations that the city may have to undertake in a constrained or degraded environment. Debris, how do we handle all the debris that may pile up after, say, a large flood or earthquake event, as well as addressing mass care and shelter. One of the city's most critical fundamental functions is to address the needs of its residents, and the ability to do so after a major event is what we call mass care and shelter, and that can be a challenge for most jurisdictions. We also discuss in detail how to proclaim an emergency, which would come to the council for your review and approval in order to authorize the city to take additional steps, expand authorities in some cases, to speed the response and ensure an effective and coordinated response. In addition to the base plan, that is the skeleton, if you would, we have also developed 5 annexes that are either hazard specific, say for an earthquake or a flood, or are function specific, for example, mass care and shelter. These annexes build on the EOP and they provide specific and detailed guidance unique to that specific disaster hazard event or that function. The second major document that we produce as part of this project for the city is the Continuity of Operations Plan, or COOP, COOP for short. The COOP plan, as it's often called. The Continuity Operations Plan does exactly that. It's designed to look inward to the city. How do we maintain our key functions and operations if suddenly we were faced with an event, not necessarily a catastrophic disaster event, but if there was some kind of challenge to the city in terms of its ability to operate, how would we keep the lights on, if you would? How would we perform those most critical services in support of our residents? Although the city had done some COOP planning back in 2015, we revisited it as part of this current project starting in last fall. Again, another interdepartmental team was formed to provide input and review the content that was developed. This is really critical because we're looking at departments not just responding to an external mission, but actually helping define, if you would, what's their most critical function? What are the things that they believe are most fundamental to serving their residents? Is it legally and statutorily required, or are these services that the city depends upon for public safety, for example? And so the department's participation was fundamental in producing a quality document. I'll also mention that The COOP is really designed to address 3 types of disruptions. That is, 3 categories of things that could go wrong, things that could challenge the city in terms of administering its governance function. The first might be inaccessibility to a key facility. For example, if we left the coffee pot on here at City Hall and there was a small fire, not a big one, don't panic, but a small fire, but we couldn't occupy the building, what would Plan B be? How would we put our workforce that's normally housed here back to work? Where would the council meet if we weren't able to meet in this specific facility, for example? Another potential challenge might be the inability to provide full services due to a reduced workforce. This might be, for example, due to, say, an influenza, where not everyone is capable or able to respond to work. If we shut down or we lose some of our capabilities in terms of our workforce, how would we move in terms of ensuring that those most critical functions are addressed? And then finally, what if we lost some key equipment or systems? Most notably, this might be our information technology systems. If the city were to lose the capacity to make full use of those systems, what are the workarounds? How do we continue to provide services without those key tools? Finally, for the scope, that is the range of where the COOP goes, I would highlight here that not everything the city does is actually immediately critical to the community's safety and health, as well as economic and environmental health. Some functions are truly what we call mission essential. If we were failed to perform those functions, there could be significant impacts in the community in terms of safety, health, as well as the environment. I should also note that in addition to the basic plan that outlines the broad response procedures and continuity of operations, each department, the 12 key departments, have their own specific subplan or annex, if you would, that provides specific details on key pieces of equipment or functional elements that they need to sustain and how they're going to do that. What's exactly their workarounds? How are they going to move staff around, for example? Have they identified alternate facilities for their functions? And finally, one of the key fixtures of the COOP plan is the establishment of a crisis assessment team, or a CAT for short, a CAT. The intent is to provide for a rapid and tightly focused group to come together and quickly assess the situation that's developing, make some additional determination as to what the potential impact is on city services, and take some immediate actions. So, for example, if we were to have a fire at City Hall, this small team would be able to come together, quickly assess which functions need to be relocated or reestablished in other areas, and make some decisions as to who has priority for the allocation of whatever resources are available. And finally, the concept of operations within the COOP plan also, much like the emergency operations plan, is focused on external coordination. The COOP concept operations tells a story about how the city as a governing body is going to come together and address the challenges that are facing it in maintaining its operations. It also does list the lines of succession for key positions in city government. In addition to elected officials, senior members of the city government have also been identified in terms of alternate and even second level replacements if the primary person is not available. We want to make sure that governance continues, and so the delegation of authority is inherent in the COOP continuity of operations plan, and your approval today actually places that policy into effect. So those are both the emergency operations plan and continuity of operations plan's highlights. And I turn it over to Neil for the next steps.
So now that we have these great plans in place as a framework, we really need to socialize them and train our city staff who are part of the EOC on how do we use these and build from there. And so in the next 6 months, year, we're going to be doing some very intense training with a small group of that EOC staff. The larger EOC staff has over 80 possible members for 3 shifts, so that in an emergency, we would be able to run 24/7. But within that, I'm going to be training a core group that will help me to become experts in these plans, those annexes, how to run the EOC, the processes that are involved in running the EOC, and how we can support the city in an emergency in one of these continuity events. We'll be doing mini exercises quarterly with that team to keep us fresh once we sort of kickstart that team. We will also be participating in a lot of regional exercises going on this year. The focus this year in the Regional Emergency Management Area, the UASI, Urban Area Security Initiative, is actually care and shelter. which is great because that's an area that we want to build on. So staff that are involved in that care and shelter area have been focusing with me on meeting with our partners in the American Red Cross here locally, as well as we're going to be participating in tabletop exercises and discussions and exercises with the region on how we as the Bay Area can build our capacity so that we can make sure if a disaster happened that we're really there and ready to support that mass care and shelter function, because it truly is one of the most important functions of any local government is to be able to take care of its residents. And we really want to be ready to do that. And so those are the steps that we'll be working on in the time to come as we build off these great frameworks.
Thank you, gentlemen. Questions, Council? Mr. Schwedhelm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. I just have a question that when new employees come into the city, how do they learn of this plan and understand their roles and responsibilities and, quite frankly, obligations of a new employee once they come in?
So as part of the city's orientation, we have an onboarding process, and I go and speak with every new employee and orient them to not only the existence of these plans and sort of understanding the framework of how in an emergency the city might move from day-to-day business into an emergency mode. We make them understand that as local government workers, they are considered disaster service workers, and we go through sort of what those obligations mean, as well as how we as a city would communicate with our employees, taking care of them first, but then how, if we need to have them help us respond, what that might look like and how we would get the information to them and put together a team. And of course, we also make sure that they and their families are prepared, because we want to make sure that if we do need them, that they are ready to come and help with this effort and are not necessarily as concerned as they might be with dealing with their own family. So we ask them as part of their disaster service work obligations to, as much as possible, prepare them and their family, and we give them a lot of tips and tools to help with that part as well.
So I know you said that this is a high-level overview, but where do the residents of the city come into this equation, and how do they know what their role is, how they can prepare for emergencies?
So there are a couple of sections in, especially in the emergency operations plan, that talk about community involvement, and there is a brief mention of COPE. And the focus really is individual responsibility and individual preparedness. The thing that citizens can do the most is understand what the hazards we face are, the earthquake, fires, floods, and sort of having a family communications plan, having emergency supplies, at least 3 days of food and water. We highly recommend a week's worth of the food and water, 1 gallon per person per day, sort of taking the stress off of our 911 system and being ready to, unfortunately, in these situations, be on their own a little bit in a big emergency. We will certainly be there to help as much as possible, but before the cavalry can get into the area, if we're the area most affected, we may have limited supplies and supply lines to help every citizen of Santa Rosa as much as they need. So to the extent they can prepare themselves with food and water, and there are lots of other things they can do to prepare, going to the COPE website and looking at that and sort of seeing the suggestions there is one way to think about building emergency kits and those types of things. But individual preparedness is where the citizen's responsibility lies, and understanding that we will do as much as we can, but depending on the magnitude of the disaster, they are the best resource for helping themselves in that food and water and other preparedness type of activities.
And that's a really important message, and you know, we hear it when there's a disaster somewhere else, like the Napa earthquake. There was a lot of discussion of that. We hear it around April 18th each year. I'm just wondering how much are we getting out that message on any kind of regular basis?
Well, I think this is, Mr. Mayor, this is the platform to begin that additional conversation. I think with the adoption of this framework, we start to put things out in an educational format, but also we're going to reorient sections of our website to do directly that kind of work. This becomes the prep work or the baseline to then start to extend that reach more actively into the community.
Okay, good. I have a couple cards on this. Colleen Fernald should be followed by Richard Canini.
Good afternoon. Yeah, Colleen Fernald. Hi. I'm one of the more unusual stakeholders. I've lived here, they don't know, and have not lived here, and it doesn't matter. I'm very interested in community safety, sound, secure. And in 2003 and 4, I was producing sustainability conferences and festivals, trying to understand that word. And what was just as important to me as things like green building was emergency preparedness. So when I looked to the county to see what they had going with that, that's where I learned about the CERT program. I think it means Citizen Emergency Response Training. Unfortunately, the state went and took camp, marijuana eradication, and they gave their new program the same acronym, CERT, which was a big mistake. So I know you have the COPE program, but I have concerns about the county being prepared and you being prepared as well. I have dread earthquakes more than anything. And so when I'm talking to the county's chief of emergency, fire and emergency, and said, have you got a model, computer model for we have an earthquake so big that Warm Springs dams break and suddenly Lake Sonoma is flooding into your city along with everything else you have to deal with? And I knew him for 2 years and I had this concern shared and he said, no, we don't have that modeled. I'm going, what? Now I'm not ready, but when I found out about CERT and they gave me their hard hat and safety vest, the hard hat's in my car right now. So how can you expand that? I'm concerned because you're putting your safety and security at risk with federal funding, with some of your policies that jeopardize that funding coming here. So I'd like to be deeply involved with your risk management. I wish I had taken a college course on that so I could really help you assess the risks that come with those kinds of trade-offs, instead of really working to solve the problem from the get-go. Because I can tell you, you're not ready. I'm not ready. Most of your citizens are not ready for these big disasters. And then, what have we learned? The Rogers Fault connected to Loma Prieta. It's only a matter of time. So what are we going to do to get ready with this dysfunctional government? Besides your city, the federal government, what are we going to do? Sit down and spend some time with me, sirs. Because you know I've reached out, haven't I? Despite the harm that's come to me, I have certainly reached out. And so I did, thankfully, get a call back from Mr. Tibbetts. I did not get a call back from Mr. Corsi or Mr. Rogers. Maybe you misunderstood. It wasn't just about attending the meeting with your city attorney. It's about engaging and building a basis of trust so that I can help you with every issue I possibly can, and vice versa. So let's make that time happen so that we can all feel more safe and sound in this city, county, state, and country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Canini.
Mayor, council members, we heard the word mitigation, and we heard building code. Okay, well, you've received numerous emails and presentations here in this chamber pertaining to the Santa Rosa Plaza parking garages, which a cursory inspection will show most likely to collapse in an earthquake. And I found out recently that your staff knows this. This is known to the city. It's known to the city staff, but apparently they only told their friends. So part of your citizens' responsibility and community engagement and mitigation, you need, in my opinion, to do something to mitigate those Santa Rosa parking garages. They are basically a house of cards of very heavy concrete members stacked one on top of another with very weak, brittle connections. Won't go into the engineering details. As you may know, I am licensed by the state of California to practice engineering and have designed bridges that some of you probably drive over. But this, you seem to ignore this. Just ignore it. Somehow or other, Mr. Simon's profit is more important to you than the public safety. That's really sad. But at least we can get the word out tonight. If anyone's interested in this topic, know ye that that's danger. That's a real dangerous. And that's probably the largest structure in this city. And it's open to the public. And God forbid it should kill somebody. And if it does, I really hope all 7 of you go to jail. Thank you.
That's all the cards I have. Are there further questions or comments from the council? Mr. Oliveras, is there any action
There is an action to adopt.
here? Sorry. Okay.
Move a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa adopting the City of Santa Rosa Emergency Operations Plan, Part 1, Base Plan, and the City of Santa Rosa Continuity of Operations Plan, and waive further reading of the text.
Second. Your votes. And that passes with 6 ayes. Thank you. We'll go back to item 13. Public comment on items not on the agenda. We'll start with Della Lambert.
Yes, I'm here. Is this on? Is this on?
Yes.
Yes, my name is Della Lambert, and I live at 2215 Yalupa Avenue, across from Phoenix Avenue. In front of my house, there's a turn lane. I have no crosswalk until I go to Matanzas School, which is 3 or 4 blocks. I'm handicapped, I have a walker, I'm visually impaired. I run from the bike lane to the turn lane, to the drive lane, to the next bike lane, and up the sidewalks where I can catch the city bus. I would like a crosswalk put on the corner of Yalupa and Sacramento Avenue, which is 2 houses down from my house. That's all I want for Christmas, and I pray we get one. There's Matanzas School there, however, there is no crosswalk there. My closest crosswalk is Matanzas School. So I thank you for your time, and I really pray that I get a crosswalk. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lambert.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Colleen Fernald.
Charlottesville. Could you imagine if you had a daughter that was murdered named Charlotte and you have to deal with constant headlines with that name being part of the headlines one way or another? So, Mayor Corsi, you liked the impressive show of support that your city put on. I'm challenging you for an even more impressive show of support for what the city could be doing to reverse the course. PeaceOneDay.org. Said it at this microphone so many times. Do you have something organized for the International Day of Peace that Santa Rosa is going to take leadership on? Invite all your NGOs to participate in? September 21st, the one-day ceasefire. My project, songsforaceasefire.org. I need some help. But it's really hard carrying the burden that I have that my rapist has never been charged, so it's really hard for me to hear you say, crime will not be tolerated. When you know you've done much more than just tolerate the crime in my life. And how hard is it for me to see these other headlines? Taylor Swift gets a verdict. Calling being groped sexual assault in comparison to what I lived through, what you tolerated. My rapist not even charged. Call me back, Mr. Rogers. I want to talk about the reform that I want for your police department, because you all are in charge. You are the bosses. And when the person you're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix the problem himself needs an oversight of how the money is spent, how his time is spent, and the results or the lack of the results. So, some of the things to overturn in your faulty police department that you allowed: victims of sexual assault are informed of every one of their rights to get the perpetrator put away. Victims of sexual assault, as well as the witnesses, are entitled to every amount of technology available in psychology with lie detection. What are you doing to protect the witness? I am here whistleblowing again and again and again. Well, thankfully, progress was made in a baby step meeting with your city attorney. Sorry, Mr. Olivares isn't here because I didn't invite him to join us, but I'm reconsidering that. Because one of the so-called progressive council members that used to be here was saying something she thought was off mic that was just cruel to me directly. And Mr. Olivares defended my honor. So even though he might want to protect the abuse that your police department has created, I want to trust that he wants to clean it up. So maybe you'll share the message that I'm inviting him to our conversations and creating a safe and sound, authentic, peaceful Santa Rosa. Thank you.
He'll be followed by Dwayne DeWitt.
And I will visit you in jail. Put some money in your canteen. Shouldn't be cruel, but there should be consequences. Barbarians, vandals, right here in Santa Rosa. As you may know, the word vandalism comes, and vandals was a barbarian tribe that vandalized Rome in the year 400 AD. That's how we got the word vandal. That was the name of that, barbarians. One of the things barbarians did, and still do apparently here in Santa Rosa, is vandalize fountains, water fountains. They destroy them. You, except for the two new guys, destroyed 2 fountains. Courthouse Square. One was the Rosenberg Fountain, which the city accepted a grant today, a value of about $250,000 from Mrs. Rosenberg, and by resolution promised to keep that fountain in first-class condition. I gave you the other ones, not you two new guys, copies of that resolution. And Mr. Blackman wrote an article that was published in the PD about it. But you still went ahead and destroyed the fountain, and that fountain's part of our heritage, and numerous Santa Rosa children have played in that fountain. But it's gone, it's destroyed, it's been vandalized by barbarians. The other one is our fountain. You were going to obliterate that from the square till some member of the community who's always going on with inaccurate information, misstatements, got something published in the PD. So then you decide, well, we'll put it back. Well, the simple question before you now is, where is the Ozawa fountain? What did you do with the fountain? Did you lose it? Did you forget where you put it? I think it's time you told the citizens where that fountain is, and can they ever expect to see it back as a fountain, meaning having water in it, because water is an integral part. One of the biggest panels is a sea scene, and it's part of our heritage. In fact, the historical story is given in bas-relief around that fountain. And the city collectively vandalized it. Okay, goodbye. Thank you.
Dwayne DeWitt.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to use the overhead. Hello, my name is Dwayne DeWitt. I'm from Roseland. What I've put up there is a community newsletter that came out 22 years ago. We have a group over there called Roseland Action that started in 1993, and it was about annexation. At the time, I was not a supporter of it, and we didn't want a county island to be made. That's generally considered bad planning. So I wanted to thank you and congratulate you for done the hard work to end the county island, that in the future, I do believe there will not be enough opposition to stop the Roseland annexation from occurring. So thanks for all the hard work on all that. Roseland Action still exists. Ernie Carpenter recovered. He's still around. And all in all, we're up to good things. So this is from the grand jury, the summaries for the county grand jury. And in there was a small little executive summary about your efforts on the homeless emergency, which I also commend. You're trying to do the best you can. It's a problem that keeps growing. But there's some interesting things here that could make a better outcome. R3 under recommendations, where these people, who I never met any of them and didn't know that I am a bit of a homeless advocate, state that it would be interesting and helpful to have the Board of Supervisors commit to making the Shunate site available for homeless services until the sale is complete. That could happen right now before the next big rains that are probably going to be here in October. We're only a couple of months away from those now. And we need to have a way to help some of our less fortunate citizens, the disadvantaged. Also, it points out that they should perhaps commit to making a portion of the parking area at the Veterans Building in Santa Rosa available. There's plenty of parking out there, lots of asphalt space. I've talked to a number of veterans groups, and they're comfortable with the idea of having people be there. And I know if somebody's uncomfortable, you could say, well, veterans first. That way we'd at least be helping those people who are in need. So if you folks were to talk about these grand jury recommendations and then get with somebody from the county, maybe some of this could be implemented. The local media hasn't really spoken much about this. They've looked at other grand jury reports instead of this main one. But this is one that really could have a very big and good effect in a short period of time. You could get something going within 2 to 3 months, I'm sure. So please, take a look at it. And then last but not least, I'm going to show you that back in the day, I had done a nice little column about golfing for humanity using golf fees and helping to build housing near golf courses. And this was a really nice one. We did it right after the Home Depot matter, which saved the Journey's End housing. And this says, "Will caddy for housing." So as you know, Habitat for Humanity now does a golf tournament, and those ideas do work. So thank you very much. I'm hoping we can get some things solved this year. All the best to you. I'll put this down.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. We are on 14.2.
Item 14.2, report confirmation of the city's position on upcoming state housing bill legislation. David Guin, Director of Planning and Economic Development, and David Gwine, Director of Housing and Community Services, presenting. I'm going to just inform council a little bit of the reason that you're looking at this item is that there was some concern expressed from the League of California Cities that this was going to be coming together as a package. The revenue tied to some of the regulatory items. Our understanding is that during the recess, there was a lot of feedback given to state representatives regarding their vote to move forward the gas tax. And that right now, our understanding, although things could remain fluid, is that is not likely to happen. A combination of revenue and regulatory. What might move forward is some of the regulatory items, but there's a great deal of pressure being exerted on the state electeds as they return to their districts to have conversations about a vote they took earlier in the spring. So I'm going to have the staff run through the presentation, the position you've taken to date, to see if there's any changes you want around those positions. But that is why this had gotten scheduled, because there had been a belief that there might have been a move forward to tie revenue opportunities together with regulatory opportunities. We're hearing the regulatory is still on track to be really considered. The revenue is less likely, and it isn't likely to have a package deal.
Thank you, Mayor Corsi and members of the council. And as the city manager mentioned, David and I are here to discuss the Senate and Assembly housing bills and give a brief synopsis of what the intent of those bills are that are moving through Senate and Assembly right now. It is a changing landscape. We've got additional information just today of some updates that we'll try to incorporate through this presentation. But with that said, as we move through the process, we'll be keeping an eye on these as they adjust over time. We also are here to take any feedback. We'll give you an overview of what we have done to date and what's on the docket. The package or the type of bills that are moving forward through the Assembly and Senate have to do with three areas: revenue, policy, and process. And that leads into the next slide, which is a little background on what we've been doing locally and what we've done in terms of responding to some of these bills. So locally, we are looking at the same approach to housing. We're looking at revenue, policy, and process to address that. And our Housing Action Plan has elements in there that address all three of those areas. We'll go into a little bit more detail later on to show how the bills tie into what we're doing locally. Our Housing Action Plan had 5 goals. I apologize, there's one missing here. The last is inclusionary housing. So we do have our 5 primary goals, which is achieve affordability by design, assemble public lands for development, improve development readiness, achieve affordable housing investment, and as I mentioned, increase inclusionary housing. In addition, as the city manager mentioned, we have submitted letters on 3 bills to date, SB2 and SB3, which are revenue generating bills back on March 7th, both support. One is ongoing, one was for one-time funding. And then SB 35, the city sent an opposed letter, primarily due to the local control aspect of that, and that it did not sufficiently address how local control was maintained through the CEQA process regarding parking, traffic, and design review process. And so we have some updates to that. There are some changes over the past couple weeks, and I'll touch on that as we get into more detail. So to start off, I'm going to hand it over to Dave to talk about the funding side.
And so this slide is intended to message what David just said. The goal of producing and creating affordable housing it comes down to project readiness and local match. And so the work of planning and economic development to ready sites for development, encourage developers to consider affordable housing, a funding mechanism to get them to a point where they can compete for tax credits and some potential funding sources that we're going to talk about in a minute is key, but that comes from a local resource. And then the other point we wanted to make here is the last time there was a local resource in the amount sufficient to really compete for these primary funding resources and meet our regional needs assessment housing units for low and very low incomes with the redevelopment agency that provided on average a roughly $3.6 million annually. So a message from this is basically the work of the ad hoc committee, our work through these bills is to really try to replace and identify a local match resource that can generate several million annually.
And just as an aside as well, I think some council members also got to see affordable housing conversation at the mayors and council members meeting recently that emphasized that because of actions taken in other Bay Area counties, your position and the position of Sonoma County in its totality when competing with local matches is being compromised right now because they've passed measures in other counties that actually start to provide the local match. We in this county continue to struggle to replace the RDA funds that were taken out with the dissolution. So I really want to hammer that point home is that not only are you competing, you're likely in competition with other counties, you're in a deficit situation because they've found a solution to local match. And those happened, a lot of them happened in November of 18. I mean, November of 16.
And to just continue the hammer, an example would be the County of Alameda, which passed a measure. They have the BART line, where they're in the same jurisdiction as Sonoma County to compete for tax credits and these other primary financing. We haven't been able to do so since that measure was passed, which led to a letter that was produced between the County of Sonoma and the city, seeking our own district with Marin, Napa, and possibly Solano counties to increase our competitiveness for that resource. We're going to return to this slide. David's going to go through some things that are going on in the action plan. We can talk about the notice of funding availability, but we wanted to jump forward to a slide and talk about where we might have positions on some of these state bills. So first I'd like to tee it up with what the city manager said is what's coming forward as a package. It's referred to as the governor's package. And there's a statement from Governor Brown, the Senate President Pro Tem, and the Speaker of the Assembly, which goes along these lines towards the late July. The package of legislation we are all working on will help ensure Californians won't have to pay an arm and a leg to have a roof over their head. It will include a general obligation bond, a permanent funding source for affordable housing, combined with regulatory reform. This comprehensive approach does what's been long needed in California: build new homes and improve access to housing. We look forward to finalizing this package upon our return from summer recess. And their summer recess ends, as you know, August 21st. So with that news, we started working with our lobbyists in Sacramento, the League of Cities. What does this package look like? And it's roughly combining two carrots, two funding sources, with two potentially sticks: regulatory reform. It blends Senate Bill 2 and Senate Bill 3 with SB 35, which you've already taken a position on, and AB 73. We'll talk about that in a minute, but briefly, Senate Bill 2, which is listed here on the page, is that $75 recordation fee on documents at the close of escrow. That's what they refer to as the ongoing funding source. The one-time source is SB 3. That's a general obligation bond of $3 billion. Now, both of those resources would go, as the bill's written currently, would go to the state housing and community development to administer on a statewide basis. We anticipate, although the bill doesn't speak to the specificity, that would be a competition through notices of funding availability, much like other funding that comes through the state HCD. It would not be considered a local match resource. The other bills listed here is AB 71. This eliminates the mortgage interest deduction on second homes, and with that it increases the state low-income housing tax credit program by $300 million. There's also Assembly Constitutional Amendment ACA 11, which imposes a quarter-cent sales tax. We're not hearing a lot of these last two bills. It's primarily focusing on Senate Bill 2 and Senate Bill 3. And then lastly, as I close off on this slide, there's a discussion taking place. It doesn't have a bill. It doesn't have a number yet, led by Mark Levine, that increases the corporate tax by 1%. That would go to affordable housing purposes. So why don't I pause there? I think I see a question.
Yeah, there's a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Director Gwine. I'm sorry, I think you already said this, but of those bills that are possible funding proposals, which one of those, how would that funding be allocated to cities? Would it be through a competitive process, or are some of these just, here's your proportional amount every year, go for it?
Yes, the answer is the bill doesn't speak to how it will be distributed. These bills speak to how it might be broken up between, say, first-time home buyer programs or affordable housing production or permanent supportive housing for homeless, but it doesn't talk about any formula allocation to jurisdictions.
Okay, thank you. I mean, in my experience, I've seen that these typically are done through a competitive process. Right. Are there any talks, in the lobbies and hallways of the Capitol, or we just really have no idea at this time?
We don't have any idea how these will close out. Our message has been that jurisdictions need a local match resource to compete for the primary sources, tax credits and other bond issues. So that's been our message to our legislators.
Okay.
And I would add to that, I mean, I think this is the point that I was trying to make earlier, is that we're hearing that this part of the equation is much more challenged in the entire state than the other work that we'll talk about in a second. These are more vulnerable to actions that were taken this year about road infrastructure and the tax revenue on that side. I would say what I've heard is it's more, if there was one to be brought forward, which would be, I think we're less supportive of as a staff, was the single time, single money in its allocation. That I've heard has more opportunity. There also has been talk about taking something to the voters statewide. But again, the reliance on recurring funding helps planning efforts, helps us think long-term because these things are not realized overnight. Immediate funding is about immediate projects, and those projects typically have to be shovel-ready to take advantage of that funding.
So one final question I have is, do we have a strong, sustained funding source that can help us compete with some of these East Bay communities? I know we have the Housing Trust. Is that a successful resource for us?
It's a successful model, but it lacks the resource to compete annually. The practice has been since 5 years loss of redevelopment is to accrue enough of a local resource and then line up a project through the Housing Authority to apply for those primary resources, but not annually.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Klein, just for clarification, on SB2, the recording fee, would that money stay where it's generated, or is that?
We would like it to, but the bill doesn't speak to that currently. Right now it goes to the state HCD.
Again, but anything that what we're also looking for is some idea of things like this, council member. If we have some things in terms of what staff could apply to pressure, or the lobbying team could apply to pressure, if those are things that would help you be more comfortable with other things that we'll be discussing later, those are guideposts, because I'll be honest, I don't think if we are in an active conversation that there will be any time to come back to council to get additional instruction on some of these items. They're going to be fast moving out of the break. So that would be an example of something we're looking for. If we could advocate, if you're interested in allocation based on where the resource came from, those are things we can start to run with to get into a conversation on the fly, so to speak.
I would be interested in that, because when money goes to Sacramento, it doesn't come back in the same shape that it went. Any other questions? Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Part of the conversation that I think we also need to include, so on the one-time funding, or excuse me, on the ongoing funding, just so that we're being really clear about it, because of the gas tax vote, this is a 2/3 bill. And so that's the part that's really holding things up. So it sounds like bonds are much more likely to come out of Sacramento, even though the governor hates them, because then it's on the voters to approve it and not on the individual members of the legislature as a result. But what that also means, part of getting the gas tax for the governor was the inclusion of a parks and water bond as well. And what I've read and what I've heard is that the governor is interested in capping both bonds combined at $7 billion. So you mentioned the $3 billion for housing, that's the SB3. I think in our conversation tonight, we also have to include that element about the parks and the water bond, because it's been put out there that that is also a part of this conversation, even if it's not currently being discussed within the confines of this legislation. So I think it would be helpful for us to discuss the bills in the regulatory framework.
Unfortunately, council member, I'm consulting with the city attorney. I don't believe you're going to be able to have that specific conversation because we didn't post that conversation. I believe we can report out where we are and what support we have provided for that particular one, but I don't believe you're going to be able to get into that conversation and provide direction because we did not post it.
Okay. Well, then what I was going to also say is that as we talk about the individual bills, I think, Mr. Micklin, I think you hit the nail on the head that things happen so quick at the end of session that less important than a specific position on a bill is for us to articulate values and principles and concepts that we'd like to trust that our representatives in Sacramento are going to be able to negotiate with and run with, particularly when we talk about on the regulatory side. We know certain things are being forced, whether we have input or not, and what can we kind of get as a result in the negotiations.
Any other questions at this point? Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so we'll move on to the regulatory side. As Councilmember Rogers discussed, that would be a good approach, is to look at what are the goals you want out of these bills. What my intention to do is to step through these one by one. I'll give a little synopsis just to remind the council what they are, what their intention is. And I can go through the process, or we can stop at each one and have a quick discussion. In addition to these 8, because it's so fluid, we do have 5 more that I've added since this was created. So I'll have 5 more to add at the end of this that I think it's important for you to hear that are out there that are being contemplated. So the first one we will probably end up talking about, this is probably one of the bigger ones, is being talked about quite a bit. It's part of the governor's package that Director Gwine mentioned. It's SB 35. I'm going to read a little bit about what's in here. The bill requires cities and counties to offer to developers a new ministerial approval process for development that meets certain conditions, including inclusionary units and prevailing wage. So this, just to be clear, is ministerial versus discretionary. So it's taking out the discretionary portion of a housing project. Discretionary is, again, board and council type action, and ministerial is if you follow the checklist and you've done the requirements that you're approved. They have added that this is an option if we don't meet our RENA goals. Again, those are the goals that we're trying to reach each year. We currently are not meeting our RENA goals. The concern that we found on this one in working with the League of Cities and our lobbyists is that there are consequences of this bill if we don't respond in certain timeframes. And the timeframes that are listed in this bill rely on timeframes that are dictated primarily by what the developer does. So they talked about pulling the permit as the point in time when we're counting a project. As we see on a regular basis, developers will wait to pull that permit depending on the weather, the financing, the typical whatever the best time is for them to move that project forward. The recommendation is move that towards when the city finishes their entitlements on that project and does the part that the city is required to do to move that forward. And so that's something that we're keeping an eye on as well. The other addition that came in that we saw today was a safe harbor approach component to this, basically saying that if local agencies are aggressive in their housing policies and are achieving some of these goals, that would be a way to achieve the same outcome versus following this bill. So we do have details on that safe harbor that's being proposed. It's a proposal. It's not part of the current bill, but we'll see what happens on August 21st if that gets wrapped in or it gets modified. And my guess is that it will get changed. There's 6 elements of that safe harbor rule, and they're fairly prescriptive in what they're going to require. So with that, currently we have an opposition letter out there. The question for the council is, do we want to change our position on that? Add different concerns or wishes that we want to see out of this bill, or leave it as is.
Council?
Well, personally, I think this particular legislation goes too far, and it was the beginning of a large number of conversations that made us stand up and take notice. And I think that I'm not sure what language we would change in our opposition, especially as these bills are evolving as we speak. It would be hard to know exactly what to respond to. But I think our letter of opposition that the mayor signed probably covers most of the important elements that we need to be concerned about.
In the letter that we did sign, it was primarily focused around local control and the lack of discretionary, specific design review and others. So the one element that we could talk to is the timing on when reporting is due and how we're held accountable as a city for meeting those goals. And that's something that I think, based on what I see in the department, it would be helpful to us as a truer tracking mechanism.
And that would be in favor of that.
But that's...
And from what I'm hearing tonight, David, it sounds like there are consequences built into this on actions that we don't have control over. So that's a concern. If that could be changed, that would be good. The safe harbor for lack of a better word, good actor cities, is there a definition of what a good actor is?
Yes, it's fairly
Let me
lengthy.
just ask, do we meet that definition, or is it on a case-by-case basis for each project? How does that?
No, it's based on city and how you meet certain goals. So for example, I'll just touch on a few of them. The provision shall not, so SB 35 shall not apply to a jurisdiction that meets all the following. It says all the following, and there's a list of 6 elements. In all economic categories, that's above moderate, low, and very low. And I'll just read the first one, that there's no violations within the last 5 years of the Housing Accountability Act, Mitigation Fee Act, Density Bonus, no net loss, anti-discrimination provisions. Then it goes into jurisdictions approved all housing projects that have been submitted on sites identified for housing. Jurisdiction has not reduced density of housing projects below density submitted. Jurisdictions implement the programs and housing elements in accordance with the schedule housing element. And the jurisdiction completes any rezoning required by a housing element within 2 years of adopting the housing element. And the last was jurisdiction can demonstrate that it did not receive applications for housing units that would have allowed it to issue building permits equal to the city's share of RENA by income categories. So this is something I just received today. I haven't gone through all of them yet to determine how compliant we are. My initial instinct is that we probably would not comply with 100% of these.
It looks back 5 years from now?
Yeah, within the past 5 years. Yeah, so
Good luck.
It would be a tough bar, but again, the caveat is that this is a recommendation, and based on the way things are moving, this is going to be changed quite a bit if it is included in the packet. And so that's something that we'll evaluate.
And I would say if there are potential changes to SB 35 that would make it look better for us, I would support those changes. As we support changes in it, though, I would still oppose it if it doesn't come with any resources for the city.
Right. Okay. And that's a good point. That is one element of the letter, is the lack of resources going along with the requirements.
So I think one of the challenging things as we track a piece of legislation like this is, we can stick to the straight opposition, or we can oppose officially, but if council were to indicate tonight that, look, we're going to tell you if the reality is that, get the best deal for the city, that's, I think, what we're also looking for, is some authorization from council to say, if there's a safe harbor provision and we know it's going, are you okay with us advocating on the safe harbor provision to get something that is manageable, more manageable than not manageable for the city? I am looking for, or is it flat, no, we got to fight this tooth and nail. It's hard for us to figure out if there is if there's any space in that conversation. Right now, it's very, very difficult for staff to gauge it. It's a hard no, I would say, right now, as it's structured in the letter. We're perfectly comfortable with a hard no, but if there is any flexibility on the safe harbor provision, I think we need to know it tonight to understand whether council is a straight no or straight no, but we also understand the reality we're facing.
Okay, can you also give us an idea of how closely we're working and keeping in touch with Senators Dodd and McGuire on this?
Well, again, right now we have a straight no, and that's what we're following up all the time with our lobbyists and with them. I think this is the opportunity for us to get into a more nuanced conversation with them about such a thing as safe harbor. Right now, we don't have any direction from council that would allow us to do that. And so that's what we'd be looking for, is that would give us some freedom to negotiate on the worst of, it's often a question of, are we negotiating on what's coming down? And that would be a conversation we'd have with them. But right now, we've been stuck in, there's no middle ground in this conversation.
Council, start with Mr. Rogers and then Mr. Sweethelm.
I think it's, to your question, I think it's worth noting that the two members of the Sonoma County delegation that have seen the bill so far are Senators McGuire and Dodd. The Assembly has not seen it yet. It's in the floor process. McGuire voted no. Dodd voted yes. And going into this conversation last night, I would have told you that there was no way that this bill was not going to be a part of the package in advance. The governor's talked about his support for this bill and the need for the bill. But the amendments that they did today, I think actually puts it back in that category that Mr. McGlynn's talking about, of being able to potentially be used as a bargaining chip. The amendments that were released today and will be put across the desk on Monday took it from this bill only really applying to Santa Rosa in our region to now the new language actually would pull in Guerneville as an example for how much is being impacted by this. So the ability to get this through the Assembly was, I think, severely diminished, even with the governor pushing. So that might be, I think this one's going to be forced on us anyway. I think that it might be a good opportunity for us to use this to negotiate that if we are going to be pushed in that direction, we say we still don't like it, we still say no, but let's try to get something out of it just in case we're forced that direction.
Mr. Schwedhelm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a very difficult conversation to have, just to give you feedback on something I have not yet read. And I can only understand where you're coming from, so I understand the unique position we're in. Yes, council has given direction on, a couple letters, we're taking this position, but I, for one, trust the city manager and the department heads. You guys are the subject matter experts in this. The seven of us up here have a variety of different understanding and knowledge of it, and it's moving so quickly, we can't get it agendized. And I would hate to handcuff you that you think, wow, I think this would be in the best interest of the city of Santa Rosa, because you guys are at as many meetings as most of us are. You understand all these comments. I trust that you're factoring all that in, and if you need to adjust, I would want you to do what you think is in the best interest of the city, given the comments that the seven of us have made. And the other wild card, I understand, not all seven of us always agree. But if we're all on the same team on this, because you're all swimming those same waters with also some of our regional partners, whether it be the county or other cities, to have to come back to us for that direction, I just don't think it's possible. So I'm comfortable with you taking all that information in and doing what you think is in the best interest of the city with direction provided by council.
Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you. I totally agree, and I think that if we were to, I was thinking about how to say this, if 35 goes up in flames, if they decide to go forward with it, then anything we can do, and we're fairly sure that it's going to, which it sounds like, I'm not sure if I'm surprised or not, but to have a bill that's going to remove so much of our approval ability and usurp the responsibilities of our board and commissions. I would think if there's a plus in there someplace, then I think we should go for it. Better having something than nothing.
Yes.
Okay.
Is that enough clarity?
That's great. Thank you. So I'm going to touch on a couple of these others. I don't anticipate as much discussion on some of these. SB 167 it makes changes to the Housing Accountability Act. There are fines and other items in here that currently are. Sorry, I'm just going to pull up the. Currently is being supported as amended by the League of Cities at this point. We do not have a letter on this one. SB 540 streamlines the housing approval process by having cities and counties identify priority housing areas where enhanced planning, environmental, and public engagement would occur at the front end of the project. These are focused specifically on workforce housing zones, so they'd be called workforce housing opportunity zones, and it would be for affordable housing in areas close to jobs and transit to conform to California's greenhouse gas reduction laws. AB 72 provides the Department of Housing and Community Development new authority to review any action by a city or county that determines it's inconsistent with the housing element. So basically just more authority to that body. SB 73 is another one that is in this package, the governor's package has been described. And so that's one I want to touch on in a little bit more detail. It's called the New Housing Sustainability Districts. And so essentially what that would do would give a new option to cities and counties to create housing sustainability districts, they're HSDs. With another acronym, with an HSD, we could complete upfront zoning, environmental sustainability, speeding up the development approvals in order to receive incentive payments through the state. And so this is similar to the one I mentioned before, where the goal is to try to get as much done as possible, streamline the process, get things ready. So similar to, a little more aggressively than to our specific plans, where we do the environmental ahead of time, get things ready for development to happen. And so that's one that is, again, in this package, and word is that we're hearing is it's likely that that one is going to move through and be passed.
Did you say that there's revenue attached to that? And where does it come from?
Yeah, that, I believe it's coming from the, I forgot the department.
Yeah, that's the package. So 35 and 73 are the regulatory reform, so to speak, but the discussion of the governor's package combines it with SB 2 and 3, the assessment on recorded documents in the housing bond. That's the revenue side that would go to the state of California for distribution.
Okay, so SB 73 doesn't work without some new revenue stream as well.
Right, the intent is to incentivize those projects with funding.
Okay.
So we have AB 879, which is the next one. Basically, provides the Department of Housing and Community Development authority to complete a study to evaluate the reasonableness of local fees charged in new development. So this is one that allows the state to look at fees and determine are they the appropriate level for what we're receiving from the development community. AB 1397 requires lands in the city's housing element to include vacant sites and sites that have realistic and demonstrated potential for redevelopment to meet a portion of the local housing needs for the designated income level. So again, this would go back to our housing element and be part of our housing action plan, but also the general plan as we move forward on that effort. We would incorporate that information if that does pass. AB 1515 requires housing projects to be deemed consent compliant and in conformity with an applicable plan if there is substantial evidence that would allow a reasonable person to conclude that the housing development project or emergency shelter is consistent, compliant, or in conformity. So the concern that the league has with this provision is it's very vague on what is a reasonable standard. So that's something that the comment that has been put forward on this one. And the league is opposing that one for those specific reasons. So then we have 5 more. I just want to touch on them because they do affect some of the work we're currently working on right now. SB 1505, I'm sorry, AB 1505 and SB 277. This is, it deals with inclusionary housing and basically clarifies the legislator's intent to supersede the Palmer decision to the extent that the decision conflicts with the local jurisdiction's authority to impose inclusionary housing ordinance on rental projects. And so this is one that we've been looking at for some time. We've seen it, and we're not sure where this is going to go, if it's going to pass or not. Again, the league does support this moving forward. AB 1521, the bill strengthens the law to ensure preservations of assisted affordable housing developments. So I'd have to dig into that one more to understand what the nuances of that are, but the league is supporting that item as well. AB 1568, the bill. This is one that is of interest to us as we're moving forward with looking at the development of enhanced infrastructure finance districts. This bill establishes Neighborhood Infill and Transit Improvement Act in Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District law. So it allows the EFIDs to receive sales and use tax and transition and use tax to finance affordable housing and the infrastructure to serve that housing in infill infill areas in agreement with the parties included as part of that EFID. So that's something that we are working with the county currently on what that development of an EFID would look like and where in Santa Rosa we generate the most revenue to help support housing and development. And two more. So SB 166. This is mandated continuous rezonings of housing sites with the ability to comply with CEQA. So this bill would mandate that the cities implement a rolling adequate sites and rezoning requirement by income level rather than total units. And this is a new one that just came in today, so I don't quite have all the details on this one. We're going to review it. Currently, the League of Cities is proposing to amend this bill. Their position is that they want more options of less onerous alternatives to the continuous rezoning that is a timely process, costly and staff resource intensive. So that's something that we'll be looking at to see what that means for our workload. And then finally, SB 540. This is the bill would streamline housing approval process by authorizing the city to establish workforce housing opportunity zones. I actually have an acronym for this, WHOZ, WOZ, by preparing an EIR and by adopting a specific plan. Once the WOZ is established and for 5 years thereafter, the bill would substantially streamline development and provide certainty for developers by requiring approval eligible housing developments within that zone within 60 days without requiring preparation of an EIR or a neg deck under CEQA. So if this went forward, the only development that could use this would require 15% of the total housing units within that area to be affordable at or below moderate income levels. And so those are the bills that are out there right now. And again, we're going to be keeping a close eye on these when they return to session on the 21st. And we'll be sure to obviously communicate if we see something move one way or the other. I did want to go back, unless this is any questions on any of these specifically. I just
go ahead.
I just want to go back real quickly to close the loop on the fact that this is happening at the state level. There are implications to us locally, but as you're going to see over the next 6 months, we have a number of local policy items moving forward to the council. These are things that we are taking action on. The accessory dwelling unit policy came from a state bill that passed, and so we are updating our policy to reflect that and also localize it to make it more effective for our community. We are reviewing our impact fees. Those are being worked on right now. We're proposing to bring that forward hopefully in the next 2 months. That'll address impact fees for development, but also ADUs. We'll be looking at our housing impact fee, commercial linkage fee. We have an inclusionary housing policy update that's being looked at. Our density bonus update, again, another state bill that gave us the ability to increase the density bonus locally. So we'll be looking at increasing that to allow projects to be more financially feasible. And with regards to the process bucket, the last bucket, we are doing a permit streamlining and a design review process update to increase or decrease the time it takes to get through our process, increasing certainty and decreasing cost to the development of housing and commercial activities. And then in addition, on the funding side, we do have the Housing and Infrastructure Finance Ad Hoc that's looking at various funding resources for both infrastructure and housing. And then the Notice of Funding Availability that we just recently awarded and have an ongoing through the Housing Authority.
And just one comment on that, in addition to the $3 million that the council just recently allocated, it's a process the Housing Authority does annually, subject to having a resource to spur affordable housing. We currently have the Community Development Block Grant, NOFA, out to the development community, but there isn't enough of a backup resource to seek other proposals beyond just what's block grant eligible.
So with that, we would be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Before I ask for any further input from the council, I do have one card. Mr. Hanson.
Good evening, everybody. Good to see you. For the last year, I've heard from our city council that our city needs 5,000 new homes. Who says we need 5,000 new homes? If you listen to these gentlemen here, they're focused on tax revenue. If you listen to the property developers, out-of-state construction crews and these gentlemen. Obviously, we need 5,000 houses. But you're forgetting two important facts: water and the quality of life for 180,000 people. And the public isn't even in this debate. Water, we just barely squeaked through the last 5-year drought. If you listen to our scientific community, we got a doozy coming in 10 years, a 30-year drought. You build 5,000 houses, can't supply water, what are you going to do? We've got a waste treatment plant that's operating at 100% capacity, combining public and industrial waste before the plant. We've got a crew up at the injection site up at the geysers that are in full hazmat. That's the quality of water we're putting back into our environment. I think this city has a lot of work to do before we start building 5,000 new homes. If you're counting on Governor Brown for water, he's shipping all our water down south. So don't count on that boy. A couple months ago, the City Council allocated $3 million to buy back contracts and provide financial incentives to private contractors to consider construction jobs in our city. Verbatim from our city controller. That tells me two things. The public is paying twice for the same contract. Financial incentives to private contractors is called grease in the palm. And in many circles, that's called bribery. And that's a criminal offense. I don't know how to stop this because the public isn't even in this conversation. I've been watching city council for the last year and a half, and we're not even in the equation of city government. We can come up here, talk our 3 minutes, back to business as usual. But the people of Santa Rosa do not want 5,000 new homes. If you want to live in a city like that, move to Rohnert Park, move to Petaluma. They're going balls to the wall. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Going back to the council, any further questions or comments? Thank you very much. Oh, Mr. Rogers?
Sorry, I have a motion here, Mr. Mayor. So all I was going to suggest from the council is I was going to put forward a couple of sort of guiding principles that I thought would be helpful for staff and then give them discretion within that. Would that be helpful, Mr. City Manager?
I'm always happy with a framework.
So what I personally would like to see, obviously the council has worked really hard on our housing action plan. So giving you the authority to work within that to support and oppose based on the principles that have been laid out in the housing action plan, doing your best to maintain as much local control as possible. This is a motion, by the way. More dollars for affordable housing. Identifying specific funding if there are new or additional requirements being placed on the city. Obviously, trying to keep dollars that are generated here to stay here. And then the last one, and I think one that's pretty important in these conversations, is figuring out how to be intelligent about the size requirements that come in so that we're not necessarily always lumped in with San Francisco or other large cities competing for dollars and competing for some of those resources that we're never going to be able to, but trying to game plan or trying to game the system, if you will, a little bit to give us a competitive edge because we do lose out, and we've heard that time and time again tonight. And outside of that, I don't know if my colleagues have anything additional that they'd want to add, but those are the things that I'd want to see from this conversation.
And I would second that.
Any further discussion? Your votes? You have 6 ayes, Thank you. Item 14.2.1.
14.2.1.
2.1, okay.
This is another legislative action item, and that's why it's being labeled this way. Report legislation making conservation a California way of life. Jennifer Burke, Deputy Director, Water and Engineering Resources, presenting.
Good afternoon, Mayor Corsi and members of council. As was mentioned in the previous presentation, this is also legislation that is continuously changing, constantly moving. So we're giving you a bit of a snapshot in time at this point. So in January of 2014, the governor declared a state of drought emergency due to historic dry conditions throughout the state of California. A number of executive orders followed, and in May of 2016, as the state was starting to emerge from the drought conditions, the governor issued another executive order that focused on long-term water use efficiency. So directing 5 state agencies in California to work on a report and recommendations for how we could eliminate water waste, really focus on improving water use efficiency, strengthen drought resiliency, and then also focusing on agricultural water use efficiency, which I'm not going to really talk about that part because that doesn't affect the city of Santa Rosa. The state agencies developed what's known as an urban advisory group to provide input on what that report should contain. And then a draft report was released in November of last year. The City of Santa Rosa Water Department staff was very active in the Urban Advisory Group and provided feedback. However, the report didn't take into account a lot of the feedback that was provided by the water agencies that were participating on the Urban Advisory Group. In particular, things like making sure that local water supply conditions were really considered, recognizing that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work for all the water agencies throughout the state because we are so different and have such varied water supply sources. So a coalition of 116 water agencies submitted a comment letter. City of Santa Rosa staff also joined in on that letter, plus we submitted a separate letter. That information and all the reports and comments, the comment letters was considered. However, the final report was pretty much exactly the same as the draft report. And so, again, the concerns from the water agencies wasn't really incorporated. So to that end, a number of water agencies had worked on trying to develop legislation to capture some of the concerns. So it was an alternative way to implement the same goals of the report, but providing for flexibility, recognizing local supply concerns, recognizing local control. And from that, Assemblymember Rubio carried 2 bills, AB 968 and 1654, that would have implemented the recommendations from the report while incorporating the concerns of water agencies. At that same time, Assemblymember Friedman also, that's a typo on my slide, sorry about that. Assemblymember Friedman also introduced bills that were going to implement the framework exactly as written. So those competing bills were going through the assembly member process. AB 968 and 1654 did get out of the Water Committee from the Assembly with unanimous support. Friedman's bills did not have unanimous support. However, a couple of the bills implementing the shortage condition piece went over to the Senate. And the Senate was starting to work on this, and then the Natural Resources and Water Committee basically decided to gut and amend all the bills related to making water conservation a way of life, and basically just put intent language that said, we're gonna figure out some version of this report and legislation to implement it, and we're gonna use some bills to carry that forward. At the committee meeting, Chairman Hertzberg did ask that stakeholders provide input on what we would like to see in bills to carry this report forward. So working with other water agencies as well as the Association of California Water Agencies and talking to our regional water partners in this area, there are a number of policy principles that have been developed and that we're recommending that the City of Santa Rosa also support, really recognizing all the same things that we had provided before, such as making sure to recognize flexibility in target setting. For example, the report recommends a water use efficiency target starting in 2025 and beyond. That's really data intensive and would require an individual water budget for every single customer, as opposed to having flexibility to set the target in a couple of different ways, which is currently what's in place for what we call our 20 by 2020 target. So we're encouraging things like having flexibility so that we can be able to implement this, as well as making sure that local supplies are recognized and making sure that the benefits of recycled water are also incorporated into any kind of target setting. In terms of the shortage response, again, really just recognizing that local water agencies best understand their local supplies. We best understand how to work with our customers to achieve reductions in water use, especially during a drought or shortage time. We know in Santa Rosa, for example, we were very successful by working with our customers, understanding what works, what doesn't, and having our shortage plan developed in such a way that it meets our community's needs. What's coming out of the report from the Making Water Conservation in California Life is a one-size-fits-all shortage plan with a set number of stages and doesn't really recognize local water supply sources. So with that, you have a letter in front of you that really is providing stakeholder feedback on the policy principles that we would like to see incorporated into any kind of legislation that comes out of this. And we have heard that there is a proposal that's already been sort of shopped around. It's referred to as the Skinner-Hertzberg proposal. That does have a number of things in there that are concerning, as well as some additional things that were never contemplated as part of Making Conservation in California Way of Life report. So the Water Department does recommend that we submit this so that the legislatures do understand the need to try and incorporate these principles. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. Any questions, Council? No questions, no cards. Mr. Schwedhelm, you have this one.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Jennifer. It's always reassuring to, when I hear both you and your colleagues, the water department, you guys are on top of this, so I really appreciate the information you provide me and the entire council. So I'll move a motion to submit a letter providing comments to the legislature regarding the development of legislation implementing the governor's Making Conservation a California Way of Life framework.
Second.
And your votes? That has 6 ayes. 15.1, Mr. McGlynn.
15.1, public hearing. Park Lane 2 Apartments, rezoning request to amend the Courtside Village policy statement to allow the development of a 3-story, 24-unit apartment complex located at 1001 Doubles Drive, assessors parcel number 035-690-103, file number MJP 14-010, Bill Rose, supervising planner, presenting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The item before you tonight is a rezoning, and it is intended to accommodate the Park Lane 2 residential project. So this is the slide that we've been presenting to the council. It's the progress report, effectively, showing how each individual project is working towards satisfying the council's goal of 5,000 units by 2022. In this instance, the 24 units represents nearly 1% of that goal, and the goal is in total 2,550 market rate units. So the actual development project is a 24-unit apartment building, and it's within the Courtside Village development area. Project applications include the rezoning, which is before you now, as well as a conditional use permit and design review. This action is a rezoning, but it's actually an amendment to the policy statement. And in this instance, it's increasing the density for the project site. It's not increasing the density for the Courtside Village area. That remains intact. It's a density transfer. And this is not uncommon. Fountain Grove has a similar provision. So the action first goes to the Planning Commission, which presents a recommendation to the council, and in this case, the recommendation is for approval, and then the council is the final review authority. So this is an aerial. You can see that the site is currently vacant. It's located on the south side of Sebastopol Road, and it has a mix of residential uses around, single-family detached, attached. There's also mixed use in Courtside Village as well, live work, I should say. Project history. This project came to the city back in March of 2014. The neighborhood meeting occurred then. Shortly thereafter, there was a concept design review with the Design Review Board. Throughout 2014, there were several rounds of staff review. Project issues were identified. Applicants submitted some revised plans. Final set of plans came back to the city in August of last year. Staff then conducted the environmental review, and that resulted in a mitigated negative declaration. That document was circulated in April of this year, and then the Planning Commission held a hearing in June. The Planning Commission approved the conditional use permit and provided the recommendation, as I mentioned, which is for approval to the council on the rezoning. In August, the Design Review Board approved preliminary design review. The final design review will come back to staff. It was delegated to staff. That can only occur after all land use actions are complete. This rezoning is the last land use action. This is an elevation looking from Sebastopol Road. You can see it's a 3-story multi-unit residential project. And this is the site plan. The units are located up near Sebastopol Road, and the parking is at the rear of the site. Parking is accessed off of Doubles Drive, which is on the right side of this frame. And I wanted to draw your attention to the left side of the frame where the project interfaces with Arthur Ashe Circle. The driveway is shown, but it's actually just emergency vehicle access. There's a gate there, so it's not a through access to that neighborhood. Project meets a number of general plan policies and goals. Those are enumerated in more detail in your staff report. We've summarized just a few here. Project meets the housing needs of all Santa Rosa residents. It maintains a balance of various housing types, and it improves the community acceptance of higher density housing through outreach and through high quality design. This is just a larger view of the site. I'm sure you're all familiar with Courtside Village. As I said, it has a mix of uses, single family, detached, multifamily, etc. Again, as I mentioned, project is subject to CEQA. The mitigated negative declaration has been approved by the Planning Commission. Staff has received several comments from the neighbors related to parking, concerns about impacts to the Millbrook neighborhood, and impacts to the Village Green Park. With regard to parking, the required parking is all provided on site, and the project meets its parking requirements. There were concerns raised about noise and glare from headlights. Those issues are being resolved through the design review process. The applicant is working towards a resolution for a fence that will satisfy those concerns. And then lastly, with regard to the Village Green Park, that park is planned for Courtside Village. It's planned to serve all of the residents within the greater Courtside Village plan development. So in conclusion, staff, as well as the Planning Commission, is recommending the council introduce and adopt an ordinance approving a text amendment for the Courtside Village policy statement. Be happy to answer any questions. The applicant team is also here as well.
Thank you. Council, other questions? I have a question, Bill. Could you explain a little more about this density transfer? Where does the density that's going to this project come from? And is that an agreement between two property owners, or is the city involved in some way? How does that work?
I think I answered this question once before. I think it came from you, and I think the question kind of came about is it, what happens to the other projects? Is the density getting used up? And to some degree, that's the case, but there are other sites still available within Courtside Village to meet the density. These planned developments, they're large scale. They have to be over 15 acres, and the idea is that they do develop over time and they adjust densities, and the transfers are part of that process.
So another developer, another property owner somewhere in Courtside Village may just have to build less.
Correct.
First come, first served? Is that?
I think that's how I answered it last time, yes.
You're exposing my memory here. Other questions? I have no cards on this. It is a public hearing, and I'll open the public hearing. You don't need to have filled out a card if you'd like to speak to this item. Seeing no one rise, yes, sir. Come on down.
My name is Mike Zalkowski. I'm working with a developer on this. I'd like to address that last question you had about the density. The overall density was fixed in the plan development. There are, I believe, 2 additional sites left to develop, and the density that those sites can possibly take is still within the limits of the overall density. So it's not first come, first serve. We're part of that entire package.
Okay.
If that makes any sense.
It'll do. Thank you. If no one else wishes to comment, I'll close the public hearing. Bring it back to the council. Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll introduce an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa approving a rezoning request to allow a modification to the Courtside Village policy statement to allow a density transfer for the development of the Park Lane 2 apartments located at 1001 Doubles Drive, assessor parcel number 035-690-103, file number MJP 14-010, and waive further reading.
Second.
Your votes, council. And that passes with 6 ayes. Thank you very much. We do have one written communication on the attendance report for quarterly boards, commissions, and committees. I have no cards for final public comment. I do want to mention that I'm informed that the 4 light columns in Courthouse Square, as you know, they are able to be programmed to different colors. The 4 colors that you'll see there tonight are blue, green, red, and orange. Those are the colors of the seal of the city of Charlottesville, Virginia. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.